We just went live. Fantastic. I see the live is up. Paul, great to see you. Welcome to this LinkedIn live session. Thank you for being here. Welcome everyone that is tuning in live to us for this LinkedIn Live from MIT Sloan Executive Education. I'm Peter Hurst, Senior Associate Dean for Executive Education at the Sloan School, and here we are in the second or third week of 2026. So this is our first live event of the new year, and I am therefore thrilled to be joined by my colleague Paul McDonough-Smith, who is a visiting lecturer at the Sloan School, really fascinating and talented colleague who will get into a really, I think, interesting conversation about the work that he has been doing with us in MIT Sloan Executive Education and out in the world around not only the applications and implications, but now moving on to the adoption of AI and something which I have to confess is a slightly new concept to me, adaptation to AI. So I'm really interested to hear more about this latest thinking that you're bringing to us, Paul. But before we get into that, let me just sort of complete the introduction once again. Hello, everyone from who's tuning in from around the world. This is a LinkedIn Live from MIT Sloan Executive Education. It's intended to be interactive. So we hope as you are watching Paul and I having a conversation here on the video stream that you will also take the opportunity to post any thoughts, comments, questions that will contribute to this discussion, and particularly any questions that you have that you would like Paul to address as the conversation goes on. We'll do our best to get through all of your questions. Please, of course, this is a networking opportunity as well, but we will try to focus in particular on questions and comments that help us move this conversation along as we go. And maybe while I just finish the introduction of Paul, if you've got any initial hellos or welcomes, I see people are already saying hello. Let us know where you're from. Let us know anything that's on your mind about this topic, anything that you're hoping that you'll get out of the next hour or so that we're going to spend with Paul. And I'll do my best to be the party host and help us get through as many of those questions and comments as we can. But Paul, first of all, welcome back. I see you a lot in lots of different places, but I'm very excited to actually get to spend a whole hour talking to you about your work. And maybe we could start with that. Just give us a bit of an update. Many of us, I think, tuning in are very familiar with what you've been doing with us, but what's really been sort of front of mind for you in the last few weeks? What's the cutting edge here?
Well, thank you, Peter. Very, very exciting to be here with you all. If I may as well, if it's not too late already in January, wish everybody who's joining us a happy, healthy 2026. Kind of wish you and your families and your friends all the very best for the year to come. So very exciting. I think as we enter, these first few weeks of January, we're at a very interesting, Peter, at a very interesting almost pivot point in terms of our implementations and adoption of AI. And really in today's discussion, just to give people a sense of kind of the trajectory that kind of the journey that we're going to go on, very much looking to thread some needles together. This idea that you referenced of from AI adoption to adaptation or adaptation. And we're going to look at that really through the three lenses that were mentioned in the title of work, workforce and the workplace. To do that, we'll introduce a concept that I've been working on over the last few months and kind of increasingly teaching in the various AI programs that I'm responsible for around AI fitness. And by that, I mean the ability to adapt to the capabilities of AI technology and reshape your organization accordingly in terms of not only your processes and your policies and best practices and what have you, but very much in terms of your operating models and your business models as well. So we'll kind of look through those lenses of work, the workforce and workplace through that idea of AI fitness, which really brings us on to kind of one of the main kind of core elements of this idea of adaptation or adaptation of organizational natural selection. So in that section, Peter, when we get to it, we'll we'll talk a little bit about some of the ways in which we can evolve our organization. And to do that, we're borrowing from some of the Darwinian and Stephen Jay Gouldian evolutionary biological kind of ideas to think about, zoom out for a moment, reflect and think about how we want to think about AI and how we want to act with AI in our organizations. That really then brings us on to another kind of topic, which is related and very much to your point I've been focusing on over the last few months, around metrics of meaning, metrics of value with AI. And the idea here, everybody, is that as we push forward with our adoption and our implementations of AI, are we really confident that the legacy metrics, units of measurement, KPIs that we have in our organizations are actually tracking to the capability of AI that we're building within the DNA of our organization? So we'll chat about that. And that will hopefully bring us to kind of a nice place for some next steps and kind of how we can almost put on our running shoes from an AI fitness perspective and really treat the year ahead whilst we're still thinking of our New Year's resolutions in a way that allows us to kind of make some changes to the way that we're operating and thinking with AI. So just before I pass the baton back to you, Peter, fully agree and pleased that you kind of mentioned around the questions and the comments that people have. We will leave 15 minutes or so towards the end, but Peter, if you wouldn't mind kind of facilitating that and kind of the pressing questions that come in whilst we're going through this, please just kind of interrupt me.
Of course, I'll happily do that. But thank you for that really great sort of overview of what you've been really thinking most deeply about in the last few weeks and what we're going to be doing in the next hour. Let's start at the beginning. You mentioned these three dimensions: work, workforce, and workplace. Can you drill down on each of those and tell us what you mean by them and how you see AI is impacting each of those?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good time, kind of at the beginning of 2026, to actually look through these lenses and actually hone in on these three areas. So I'll just give a sense, firstly, of what how I would define or how I think of these three, and then we can spend a little bit of time digging in to the way in which we're seeing AI impact these three areas. Okay, so firstly, with regard to work, what I've seen over the last period. And this is both in terms of the organizations that I'm interacting with, the business leaders that we have on our programs, but also the research that I'm involved in and kind of have had the opportunity to access as well. I see that from a work perspective, the tasks themselves that are actually building our roles and the workflows that we're working with are changing. Then secondly, in terms of the workforce, I see that the skills that are required to be effective and to drive impact are shifting in our organizations as well. So not only are the tasks in terms of the work that we're doing kind of, is that changing? And not only are the skills shifting that we need in our workforce, but I think we're also seeing as well the structures and the organizational design of our companies, our firms, our organizations is evolving as well. So I'll just, if it's okay, Peter, just spend a couple of minutes on kind of digging into each of these. So when I say that the tasks are changing in our work and then the workflows, this really hits kind of at one of the core kind of principles or characteristics that I think we should keep top of mind at this stage of 2026 around the decomposition that's necessary in our jobs, in our roles, in our workflows to work effectively with AI. And what I'm truly getting at here is, if you look, for example, at your role, Peter, or if I look at mine, or all of us here kind of together, if you just kind of in your mind's eye for a moment, think about the job that you're doing today. Research kind of suggests that if we were to decompose and break down our individual job roles, we would see that there are generally 15 to 25 constituent component parts. What I think is really critical here at this point is to be able to look at each of these decomposed activities and tasks in our job roles, in our workflows, and determine the degree to which each of these can be undertaken or can be automated, shall we say, can be automated, augmented, or agentically assisted today with AI. So fundamentally, if you think, we'll keep it simple in terms of the math, if you work in an organization where there are 10 job roles, fundamentally, we might argue that there are 200 core activities or tasks. So even if you were to almost color code them in terms of which tasks are kind of fit for automation, augmentation, or agentic assistance, you start to create almost a periodic table of thinking, well, hang on, we can see how work is actually getting conducted in our organizations. And of course, as AI develops and evolves throughout 2026, we're going to see some shifts. Some of the tasks or activities that potentially could be augmented today might become prime opportunities for automation or agentic assistance. Okay, so I think actually drilling down a level in terms of what work actually is in our organizations is going to be super helpful. Then, with regard to the workforce itself, I think there's somewhat of a paradox at play here, where yes, we're talking about AI and we're talking about digital technologies and zeros and ones and what have you. But I think somewhat paradoxically, whatever knowledge we have around the models and the technology isn't going to be enough to actually optimize the impact, the adoption or adaptation with AI. We very much need to turn the gas up on those human-centric capabilities that everybody who takes my classes has heard about, so I shan't go into too much detail here. But things like creativity, curiosity, the critical thinking, compassion, consilience, all of the emotional intelligence, empathy, all of these things constitute capabilities in our organizations that can help us unlock the potential of AI. If we can't find a way to unlock even more of the creativity that kind of is within our workforce, if we can't incentivize and reward, almost like reinforcement learning, Peter, if we can have a mechanism whereby when creativity, curiosity, and these kind of human capabilities that unlock AI's potential are being used, we actually recognize it, we reward it, we incentivize to create almost that culture and that opportunity for change management that's going to help us to move forward. And then finally, just a little comment around the workplace itself. It's interesting, isn't it? If we look back in history at previous industrial revolutions and organizational revolutions, if we look at the electrification of the workplace, we see that initially, for quite an extended period, actually, productivity when electricity was introduced didn't overtake the productivity that being secured with steam. Yeah, it was really when the assembly line, the production line, the actual business model, as well as the organizational and the layouts of the factories and the production sites changed, that we were able to set ourselves up for success with these new technologies. And I think it's interesting, we've seen enough over the last 2 or 3 years, particularly since the introduction of ChatGPT, we've seen enough around the recalibration of the relationship between humans and machines to understand, well, how can we set up our workplaces to take advantage of the complementarity between humans and machines? What I'm getting at, just a particular example, there's some research by Lee et al. Kind of from 2024 around the relationship or comparing the productivity gained when you have an individual human working with an individual AI, when you have a group of humans working with an individual AI, or a group of humans working with groups of AIs. And what we fundamentally see, to kind of get to the punchline, is that the human collaboration and that spark of creativity between the humans, when interfacing with the AI model, actually allows for greater kind of outputs and greater productivity. So one of the questions we should be asking ourselves is, as we work in our organization today, in our offices, in our spaces, how are we actually evolving the architecture, the ecosystems, to take advantage of what the research is telling us is the best way to harness these technologies? So really, Peter, those are kind of some initial thinking on this the 3W lens of actual work, the workforce, and the workplace.
Great, thank you. That's a very helpful overview and framing. And I couldn't help but notice when you were describing that you're increasingly using sort of the language of evolution and maybe even Darwinism here.
Yes.
Could you expand a bit on that? You said adaptation a couple of times now. What do you mean when you say that?
Well, it's true, kind of like a lot of people probably on visiting the various museums in London, Natural Science Museum, etc., and you see that sculpture of Darwin at the top of the stairs, you know, when you go past the whale, kind of downstairs, it makes you think around. I think all of us in our various organizations, various industries and what have you, have recognized that AI is most probably a general purpose technology. It's permeating pretty much every aspect of how we work, not just inside our organizations, but with our kind of networks, our partners, our customers, clients, existing and emergent, outside of the company as well. And so I would argue that, or at least ask you to consider, everybody, that these general purpose technologies like the internet, like electricity, etc., have a profound effect. They almost, you know, if you were to go, I forget what they're called, you might know this, Peter, I think they're called augurs, these things when you go to Greenland or kind of Iceland and you kind of want to take a sample, a soil sample through the ice, you kind of, you screw down like almost like a corkscrew, and then you take the thing back out, and you can see at the various stages of kind of human evolution or human history that there were step changes. Yeah, you can see kind of where major events took place, major changes, etc. And so I would argue almost metaphorically that we arguably in a position today where AI is fundamentally altering. It's almost like a punctuated equilibria, the Stephen Jay Gouldian term, that whether it's leadership, whether it's management, whether it's collaboration, whether it's innovation, AI is having an impact across all of these kinds of areas. So I think it's worthwhile maybe to explore the relationship between this idea of evolution from organisms type of perspective in regard to our organizations as well. So if you think about it, I often think that one of the most amazing things about evolution is the idea that a relatively simple kind of algorithm, if we look at it that way, in terms of natural selection, when it's repeated and replayed, it can drive incredible complexity and incredible results over a period of time. So it's a relatively simple algorithm, but it kind of creates this complexity. And I think we see this duality with our work on AI as well. So if you think about almost the interface that we use with our LLMs today, it's very simple, isn't it? When we get better, as we get better with prompting and interacting and interfacing with the models, we allow them to kind of, through their complexity, through their deep neural nets, etc., to actually create outstanding results. And I think in our organizations as well, there are some parallels that we can draw between evolution in organisms with the evolution and development and pathways forward in our organizations. And I would say that there are perhaps three core elements that we need to look at in this area. It's almost like a three kind of step loop or simple algorithm around variation, selection, and retention. And so if we lean on the Darwinian kind of ideas here, when it comes to variation, in all of our organizations, we kind of have been and need to continue taking a number of small bets, creating lots of ideas from which then we can conduct experiments. And this is where the selection comes in. As we conduct experiments and we get the data-driven kind of successes and patterns and pathways forward, we can actually let the data decide what we want to scale and move forward. And so I think we've been seeing this in our organizations as we've experimented over the last couple of years with LLMs and then most likely today with multimodal, generative AI and agentic AI as well. And then it comes to the lock-in point of retention, where when we see things that are working, we decide we're going to scale with them and we institutionalize what works. So I suppose in a sense, Peter, I'm trying to put forward this idea that in our organizations as well, we can employ a relatively simple kind of algorithm, in this case around variation, selection, and retention, that will allow us to explore, to experiment, and to evolve with the technology. And so this is where this is the first part of the pathway, I think, from adoption to the adaptation and adaptation. The argument being that, yes, we can adopt AI, we can implement it, we can probably kind of drive some success and some pathways forward. But unless we actually evolve our organization and adapt to the capabilities of the technology and actually have plans to mitigate for its weaknesses as well, we're not ever really going to get to the point where we can actually optimize the and convert more of the potentialities of the technology to real business impact.
Interesting. So that's, you just described it through a kind of an organizational lens in many ways, but I also hear you talking often about the human lens on this. So, we've got a few thousand people around the world who are watching us have this conversation, and I suspect many of them have or would like to have kind of leadership roles that, in their own organizations, in their own businesses, and of course they're interested in this topic. What does what is maybe an adaptive leader or an adaptive leadership mindset look like to you to be able to not only survive but frankly thrive in this ecosystem that you're describing?
That's great, Peter, because that's exactly you put it much better than I did. In fact, it's not around survival. We're looking to kind of help everybody on this call and everybody who attends our programs to actually be able to thrive and to create the futures, not only that they need, but the ones that they want as well. So I think I'd kind of answer that question in the context or through the lens of this idea of AI fitness, if it's okay. So I think I'll roll off kind of 4 or 5 kind of core characteristics I think that adaptive AI leader needs to have. So firstly, to be adaptable and adaptive yourself. Okay. Now that all sounds very easy, doesn't it? The idea that we're prepared to be digital explorers. We will explore with AI. We will kind of disrupt ourselves and evolve. The reality of this is that it's not quite that straightforward, because whenever we're kind of exploring and evolving, it means that we have to leave certain things behind. Okay. So to truly be adaptive and to be adaptable means that we need to really embrace this idea of almost the scientific method. I'm going to roll up my sleeves. I'm going to explore. I'm going to touch the technology, and I know all of you are. We're all playing with the technology. But then, when we're playing with it, to build this intuition around where it can be useful and where it can be helpful. And then when we've built that intuition, to have the structure and the critical thinking to construct the experiments that are going to allow us to collect the data that determines our pathway forward, how we're going to attack and how we're going to jibe. Then the second kind of core element I would suggest is to be willing to recalibrate our human and machine partnership, our human and machine collaboration. And what do I mean by this? Well, I think we have, at any point in time, we have a sense of what jobs, and in the context of what we're talking about here, what tasks and activities in particular can be automated, augmented, or assisted agentically with AI. We build this mental picture of what the humans are good at, what the machines are good at. And we try to find this complementarity so they support each other and they mitigate each other's weaknesses. This means, however, though, we have to have this ability, if we're going to truly recalibrate and be able to redefine our human and machine partnership based on the evolving capability of the technology, we're going to have to be willing to zoom out a little bit and kind of loosen our grip on some of the things that we think we're good at, or we think are the domain of humans to be automating, or to be completing, or to be executing. So I think that's important. Of course, the third element that I would put in here is this idea of continuous experimentation. And please don't laugh, Peter, or kind of anybody. I find myself increasingly in the classes that I teach, beseeching kind of the participants and our friends to, when they leave our programs, to have their AI running shoes on and kind of be focused on this idea of AI fitness, which means building into their calendars 15, 20 minutes. I used to say 3 times a week, but in reality, it has to be 5 times a week. I think at least 15 to 20 minutes every day, micro learning, doing different things to actually build and bolster our appreciation of AI. And I don't mean only passively, which is, there's lots of great stuff out there in terms of, I'm a big fan of the Deep Mind podcasts. I'm a big fan of a lot of Andrew Ng's work, and there's great amounts of videos on YouTube and everywhere else, and kind of Spotify, and we can kind of access those. But I'm more interested perhaps in the active tasks and activities. What are we doing to build, to play around, to actually construct our first agents? What are we doing to actually put ourselves in that position where we're constructing and making something? Yeah. And so I think 15 to 20 minutes a day, or building almost a fitness plan. You know, a lot of us will have kind of signed up for gym memberships here in January. Yeah. So why not kind of metaphorically do the same in terms of what are the exercises, the activities you're going to undertake, active, passive, combinations of both, 15, 20 minutes a day. And if we do that, almost like if we were to go to the gym or go swimming every day, you look back 6 months after you've started and you have a different set of capabilities, a different set of skills. So I think that's really important. A fourth one is to construct these learning and feedback loops. I think there's a danger sometimes that our AI activities can be conducted in isolation. How are we taking the data? How are we taking the insights and construct and building, engineering it back in to other parts, other tasks, other activities? Because I suspect, even if you think, for example, Peter and everybody, if we think about how we feel when we interact with LLMs or multimodal generative AI or agents for that perspective, for that kind of idea. How do we feel when we're interacting with these agents? I suspect that, or I'll speak about myself for a moment, one of the big insights for me has been the reasoning kind of capability of the models, whether it's deep research, whichever kind of LLM is your preferred, whether it's Gemini or ChatGPT and Claude, et cetera. The reasoning kind of capability is something, it's a capability that doesn't exist for me only in my interactions with the agents and the models. It's something that I've taken back into other workflows or other parts of a workflow within my job and within my role. So this ability to actually be able to learn lessons from the technology and then apply them into non-technical or non-technological kind of contexts, I think is super important. And then the final one around, maybe I'd put it, it's linked to what I've just said there around strategic inheritance. So what are the lessons I'm learning and how am I kind of bolting them in to my best work practices? Okay. So if I'm kind of saying to all of us, we need to spend 15 or 20 minutes a day, or we should consider spending 15 or 20 minutes a day interfacing and playing around. Heaven forbid we use the word play, but I think it's important. Playing around with these technologies and building and strengthening our intuitions. How are we actually taking the lessons learned from all of that and making sure that we kind of can use them moving forward? So we're kind of almost building, or kind of almost like base camps, we're climbing up a certain mountain here to be able to work effectively. So I think the key question that I have in mind talking about these signs or kind of characteristics of organizational fitness, the question that comes to mind isn't really, well, will AI replace my company or threaten my company? It's much more around, can my organization evolve fast enough to remain fit in this AI ecosystem that we're within? And we can adopt, going back to where we started. But if we don't adapt to the capabilities of the technology, I fear that we won't be able to kind of get anywhere near the potential results that we need and we're looking for with this technology.
Great, that's very clear and helpful. Thank you. So I think it's very easy to fall into one of the either for or against extreme kind of mindsets in a discussion like this, either a kind of very utopian one about what does this technology already enable us to do or going to be able to do with it. There's an equally powerful sort of dystopian narrative that we hear as well. I don't think any of us will be surprised probably by what your answer is to the question of utopia or dystopia. But I think perhaps what's more interesting is what are you seeing are not only the opportunities but kind of like the pitfalls that people who want to be leaders on this journey actually need to really know about and be aware of. Not just buying into the vision, not just giving in to the potential downsides that we're all aware of, I think. But as a leader, I think somebody, I'm just trying to look through it, said in the comments, it's kind of dealing with this ambiguity, dealing with this sort of, it's not good or evil, it's both.
Yeah. So no, this is a really, really important point. And when you started kind of with the question, Peter, I found myself kind of going back to the idea of decomposition and the value of decomposition, because this is something we do in our everyday lives. It's not a new thing, is it? We all break kind of complex problems down into the simpler kind of easier to digest ones. We often break a big problem down into its 4 component parts. It's 16, it's 64, it's 256 kind of sub problems, and then get to work, and often hopefully in an agile type of way where we can undertake and complete or execute kind of activities in parallel. Then we recombine the results and kind of we make progress. I often think one of the big benefits of decomposition is sometimes overlooked, which is that of momentum and mindset. Okay. So when we decompose a complex problem that's probably just outside of our kind of reach or grasp or what have you, and we can't really kind of deal with it, when we break it down, not only do we give ourselves pathways to kind of make progress, but we actually have the opportunity to focus our energies and align and create a momentum and a positivity and set of characteristics. So I think decomposition and being pragmatic and practical and moving forward. I'm also of the opinion, I might sometimes oscillate between a utopian and a dystopian kind of view of all of this, because there are promises and there are perils, of course, and pitfalls. One of the big pitfalls, I think, is paralysis. I was trying to think the right word to use here, but if our concerns limit our ability to act, okay, if we're standing on the sidelines, I think we run the risk of missing the bus, so to speak. I was speaking to an organization the other day, Peter, who were talking to me about they've done a lot in terms of AI literacy, and they've recently kind of done a lot of agentic AI training. And the next thing that they're focusing upon, they've identified needs to be role modeling AI. So what are the role modeling kind of characteristics that their leaders need to exhibit to actually align AI vision and activity within their organization? Now, I think there's a risk if we don't spend time deliberately discussing and thinking about how we want to think and act with AI in our organization, and actually almost coming up with a set of principles and practices that mean that we are not only motivating ourselves and giving ourselves the opportunity to create momentum, but inspiring those around us and giving them a sense. Now, there's going to have to be a massive or significant investment in learning, in training, in learning, in developing, evolving the workforce. There's going to have to be a significant investment in communication and collaboration. There's going to have to be a significant, substantial investment in thinking about what are the capabilities that represent our organizational design, etc. Because if we kind of draw a line or kind of create a graph here, and we think about, we're talking here at the beginning or the middle of January 2026, where are we going to be in 12 months' time? Where do you want to be in 12 months' time? I think it's very difficult to actually look 2 years, 3 years, 5 years out. But we know that the frontiers of AI today, in terms of agentic AI, multimodal, the evolution of the LLMs, that's not going away, okay, as such over the next 12 months. It'd be very, 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 very hard to imagine that would go away. I mean, strange things can happen, of course, but if we take that as a kind of base, a foundation to think about what we're going to be doing, where do our organizations want to be? So I think if the ambiguity paralyzes our organization, if our mindset isn't to kind of decompose and do the small next things to move forward, then I think we run a risk of being overwhelmed by the capability of the technologies. And that's something that I see sometimes in the eyes of the CXO teams that we interface with, not knowing where to start, not knowing what to do next. And so if I may, Peter, I shan't belabor this point, but just think for a moment of this idea of AI fitness in your organization. If today you are an organization, and nobody put their hands up, because this is just a mental kind of task. If you find or you think that your organization is resistant to change, if the investment in AI learning and skill development is, in your opinion, lower than it needs to be, if you're operating in a siloed kind of AI and data type of context, if you feel that there's a misalignment misalignment of AI leadership in your organization between the top of the house, the middle, and kind of lower areas, or if you see that you're losing key talent, I think these are all indicators that we need to kind of press forward in a positive, decomposed type of manner, determining what are the next steps, understanding kind of what we need to achieve, breaking that down, and then actually having a plan for how we're going to move forward is probably the best way to determine or get closer to utopian kind of or positive outcomes with the technology. So I think, Peter, it's a question of momentum and a focus on doing what's next, but with this ability to zoom in and out. So we're not just putting the blinkers on and kind of moving through 2026 as if nothing is going on in the world or kind of in the technology. Taking those steps back, having a plan to bolster our organizational AI fitness, our individual AI fitness, and being aware that by running simple kind of algorithms, we can actually create complex positive outputs in our organization with AI.
Great, thank you. While you've been talking, we've been getting some really interesting comments, observations, and questions coming in as well. Let me just take a pause and try to cover some of those. Actually, one just as a starting point, I thought was kind of interesting. You've been talking about AI in through the lens of being a general purpose technology, and there are, of course, and you've given some examples of what potential applications and places that people and organizations could be starting are. But as you think about the companies that you've been helping and working with, or the many hundreds of people who have been through your courses on this topic, are you seeing any patterns that are consistent across all sort of industries and sectors, or are there any that where you see there are particularly different opportunities or challenges? Maybe highly regulated industries are different from tech industries. What's that landscape like as you're seeing it at the moment?
Yeah, well, that's great. Thank you for kind of to whoever put the question forward, and thank you, Peter, for kind of translating it and kind of sharing it with me. That question kind of hints at, I've spoken a lot, and I promise I shan't speak anymore, about decomposition. Okay, so that's one of the kind of the big kind of mega kind of things and trends that I think that we should be very mindful of. The second, Peter, which is related to this kind of question, is one of error detection and error correction. Okay, so I'll come back to that idea in just a second, borrowed from obviously kind of Claude Shannon, going all the way back to kind of his master's thesis on signaling kind of here at MIT. So what I'm actually seeing is, and it's well documented, isn't it? 2023, 2024, 2025, whether it was Danielle Lee, Eric Brynjolfsson papers like Generative AI at Work, the work of brilliant work of Jackson Liu, lots of kind of people associated with MIT and other kind of brilliant kind of institutes and universities have kind of tracked the relationship between AI, generative AI, and knowledge work. Yeah, and what we've seen often, to put it in a nutshell, and apologies for kind of oversimplifying all of this, but we're seeing that at lower to middle kind of levels of knowledge work, that generative AI or AI is making massive inroads. So if we look at the workflows in our organization, and where content creation, code creation, etc., can be used relatively, and that's an important word, relatively safely we're seeing the technology being embraced and working very well. So whether it be in marketing, in sales, product descriptions, all of those types of areas. What I think is interesting though, and all of us, for all of you who play around and kind of work with large language models and generative AI and deep learning on a daily basis, you already have a sense of this. So apologies, I'm just putting words around the things that you already kind of see. What you will have noticed is it's often termed as hallucination. Kind of one man's hallucination is another man's creativity, et cetera, et cetera. But what we're seeing, or what you will have seen, is that the capability in certain tasks and certain activities is almost off the spectrum. Yeah, it's massively capable, the technology, of kind of providing impact and providing very positive outputs. What I've seen in my conversations with organizations over the last 12 months, fundamentally, is that oftentimes, because these organizations haven't had in place a robust error detection and error correction kind of process or set of actions and activities, they haven't been able to move forward because of the risk associated with using the technologies. So to try and put it in a nutshell, what I'm getting at is that whenever we're using these technologies, and I was taught this very succinctly and very, very concisely by Ramakrishnan, our professor of practice for AI and machine learning, Peter, is that when we're working with these technologies, we have to understand the cost of using the technology, the cost of the error detection, and the cost of the miss. So we've heard a lot around kind of terms like a human in the loop, but my kind of point here is if we wish to truly unlock the next kind of phase of generative AI being used for a really, really positive impact in our knowledge work, we need to kind of double down on this error detection and error correction, to have robust processes and policies in place in our organizations so that we're aware not just of the cost of using the technology, the cost of not using it, the cost of recognizing a miss, but being very sensitive to the cost of not even finding the error. Okay, so that if we can actually make inroads and kind of make progress in terms of our error detection and error correction, I think it unlocks the potential to use AI in lots of other areas. Yes, of course, the technology, because of how the tokenization works with generative AI, is always going to have the possibility for errors. But if we can overlay that either with other AIs helping to recognize and mitigate and kind of maybe even correct those errors, and have humans almost as the supervisors orchestrating a series of these activities, we can make great progress. So I think a little bit of a shift really from the experimentation into the careful custodianship, if that even exists, of how we actually apply these technologies to our workflows and practices.
Great, thank you. That's super interesting, and maybe that's a kind of a segue into another topic which I know you've really been thinking a lot about, and you mentioned it once or twice, is kind of the idea of metrics and measurement. And one thing I'm kind of inferring from what you just said is that you need to be very careful and thoughtful about what it is that you actually do and can either measure or at least try to assess and evaluate. What's your thinking about that question at the moment? It's a pretty strong claim to make in a place like MIT that I'm going to talk about measurement. So tell us about measurement.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks. No, I think this is a really important and fascinating kind of area. In essence, my thinking kind of orbits around this idea that if we accept that AI is a powerful general purpose technology, and that it has an impact and its kind of capabilities permeate so many different aspects of our functions, our organizational design, how we do what we do, how we do work, etc. If we accept even kind of a percentage of that to be true, should we also recognize that there's a potential that the existing legacy units of measurement and metrics of value and KPIs that were coupled with previous technology stacks or previous ways of doing work aren't necessarily, not all of them, are necessarily fit for purpose in terms of measuring the impact of AI. Now, please, everyone, take let's zoom out from this for just a moment. And I invite you all to think about the way in which you use AI today. I mean, you'll be using AI in lots of kind of traditional kind of machine learning types of way, loan applications, lots of different things, whether pattern recognition, a lot of kind of medical insurance, banking, et cetera, types of contexts. You'll be using generative AI as a result of kind of deep learning kind of breakthroughs for creative kind of generation types of tasks. You'll be using agentic AI in workflows in a kind of in an active, not a passive type of way, where these AI systems are proactively going out to the world and executing workflows on your behalf. So if you think about the way in which you're using AI today, you don't have to kind of send us a message on this unless you want to contact me, but have you recognized your intuition? You have a great deal of experience and expertise in the workplace. Are you noticing at times that the AI agents you're interfacing with are creating value that isn't easily recognizable with the metrics and the units of measurement that we're using today? My argument here is that any new major technology that kind of is infused into the workplace creates an opportunity to do work in a different way. How we measure the from A to B of that and the before and after, I think needs to be evolved and upgraded, or I think it's a reasonable argument, a defensible argument to make, that we should kind of keep our eyes open for the areas in which AI is having an impact, but haven't yet created units of measurement that reflect that progress. For example, Peter and everybody. So you all know, you will all have been struck by this when you're interfacing with AI, with a large language model. My goodness, how fast does the response come flying at you? Is there an element of that velocity that equates or is equatable to the decision velocity in our organizations? If you think about, oftentimes the way I find myself justifying this or kind of explaining it or relating it is that I say, well, kind of this report that I might have created, if I were to do this or we were to do this in a human-only context, would have taken me 15 work days. With the use of the technology, with the use of LLMs, I can probably kind of reduce that to kind of 20% of that and get it done in 3 days, even with the error detection, error correction, and kind of improvements and management of the content, etc. So this idea of velocity, where does that show up in other business areas where we're implementing and applying AI? Is there the opportunity, have you seen in certain places and spaces that AI is resulting in an increased decision velocity? Is it also, and I'm not trying to put words in anyone's mouth, I'm just trying to give a few examples. Is there potentially an opportunity with AI to increase decision quality uplift? How about a human empowerment index? Because if I'm interfacing and I have, for example, I take my ideas, I work my ideas, I ideate with these technologies, is there an element of my discretionary efforts, motivation, empowerment, that's kind of the technologies, these AI agents, is positively impacting? What about innovation yield? Because I can potentially kind of get more ideas and kind of get more kind of pathways, is that actually creating a greater creative friction and tension, which improves downstream to the innovation yield? And what about learning loop kind of efficiencies, where the learning that I'm taking place is actually creating ripples kind of further out and improvements further downstream? Now, I don't know, because Peter, these are all areas that one would have to research, etc. But that there are times when I'm working with these technologies, and of course I'm no different than anybody else on this course. I suspect you might have kind of had this experience as well, where you think, well, that's strange, or that's a little bit curious, or that's a little bit different. I think these areas are kind of very good areas for starting points to recognize the units of measurement or the metrics of value or the metrics of meaning that are actually really going to be the foundation of determining the impact that AI has moving forward. If we can't measure where the impact is, or if we're kind of not looking in that area, we risk kind of not understanding truly the impact that AI is having and can have moving forward.
Great, thank you. And as you were talking, I was just looking through some more of the great discussion that's happening on the on the LinkedIn page. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your thoughts as well as questions. And one theme I see coming through really strongly is, I think, very aligned with what you've been describing, Paul. That is, not only is this like an amazing technological pace of development and so forth, even to the point that it's starting to look a bit sort of Arthur C. Clarkean, like magic rather than science to many of us, but there is simultaneously this very important sort of human and organizational dimension as well. And so I'm seeing a lot of comments and thoughts about what is it that as leaders people really need to be thinking about and doing to enable their teams and their organizations to be successful. I think you've talked a lot about adaptation. I think you've hinted at or even explicitly said that learning is an important part of that process as well. And so one of the questions, and I won't find the name, sorry for the person, I'm just going to steal your question. It was a very good one. What are two or three examples of the kinds of things that leaders really need to be doing, ought to be doing, to help ensure that their organizations and their teams and the workforces that they're responsible for really have this fitness that you're describing?
Yeah. Thank you for whoever kind of brought this question up, and thanks, Peter. The overarching kind of response, it might surprise people a little bit. I think increasingly in my classes and what have you, reflection, Peter, that has to be a core capability of all of us as leaders today. Somewhere along the line over the last kind of 3 to 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 years, we've convinced ourselves that we always need to go at 100 miles an hour to make progress and to kind of to be on it. In fact, that's kind of interesting in the units of the units of measurement, the metrics of value that we employ in our own work. Yeah, I think we need to kind of we need to challenge some of those kind of assumptions that we've built into our working practices over the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. It's not a bad thing to take a step back and reflect. Even when I talk about the 15 or 20 minutes a day for AI fitness, part of that could be quite simply having a cup of tea and thinking about how you want to think about and move forward with AI. So giving all of that to say, giving yourself the space within which to change the way you are working. Okay. And so just to double down or reinforce some of the points that I made, you've heard me say this often, Peter, around truly engaging with this idea of continuous experimentation or exploration that gives the experimentation, so you can evolve in a data-driven type of way that where to move forward, that you're taking direction from the data that you're kind of receiving. I think it's very useful to think in terms of dualities. When I first read Brynjolfsson and Andy McAfee's book, Machine Platform Crowd, there's lots of great stuff in that book, but I was actually struck most by the structure of the book itself. And it's structured around the recalibration of 3 major relationships in the digital economy. And it wasn't the fact of whatever the 3 relationships are, the machines and humans, the platform, the products, the core, the people inside your organization, the people outside of it. That was all by the by for me. And I don't mean to be at all, it's great work. But this idea of just recalibration, so it wasn't revolution, it wasn't throwing things out. It was almost creating like a number line and tweaking it to kind of get the optimum performance. And so I think there are key core dualities at the heart of AI today. There's the Danny Kahneman kind of idea of thinking fast and slow. Yep, we have to be fast in terms of our experimentation and deliberate in terms of what we do. But we also need to have that reflective kind of slower kind of system where we're thinking, hang on a second, what's going on here? And kind of what is the data telling me is a kind of sensible pathway forward. There's also this kind of duality of the simplicity and complexity. Simple algorithms, 3, 5, 10-step kind of algorithms that you can apply to sense make and learn and collaborate to communicate more effectively in your organizations. There's clearly the duality of human and machine, which one does which tasks, why, when, how, etc., etc. So I think by focusing on that scientific method of exploration, experimentation, evolution, appreciating dualities and recalibrating opposition along that number line, so to speak, decomposing our tasks, or sorry, decomposing our roles, our workflows into their constituent parts, and seeing through critical thinking where AI has the capability to help today, are all very important things forward, as is this idea of a fitness plan. So if you were to sketch out, if everybody on this kind of session today were to take 15 minutes, kind of when we finish in 5 or 6 minutes, to actually think, well, okay, for the next 28 days or 7 days, what are the things I'm going to do within these 15 to 20-minute blocks, and actually put it into your calendar. I'm not in the business of guarantees and predicting the future and stuff, but I'd be really surprised if we weren't all in a better place this time next week or this time next month, if we take that type of approach. So we have to kind of disrupt ourselves. We have to, but above all, we have to do things. Yeah, we have to kind of explore, experiment, do the small little things, and make progress kind of day by day. What I would say, Peter, just one final point about this, I'm very much struck by, and this is just a general management and leadership kind of perspective. If I want to be successful tomorrow, it's not how I turn up tomorrow. It's the things that I do today to prepare. It's the two, almost like a digital presentist versus kind of technology futurist. If I'm willing to kind of do 2 or 3 small things today, I move the dial in terms of what I wake up to tomorrow morning. Yeah. So this kind of idea of small steps forward, it doesn't mean that you're not going after the biggest and best problems. It means that you're kind of breaking them down into their kind of constituent parts so you can make more efficient and effective progress. So those are some of the things, Peter, that I would focus upon as in terms of takeaways, perhaps.
Great, thank you. And I was just reviewing while you were talking again, and one of the threads that's going on, this fantastic conversation going on the LinkedIn thread. Thank you, everyone, for all your contributions to that. But I'm just looking back through Jens, I think, who's been contributing quite a lot to this. Earlier on, made a very interesting observation about, I'll paraphrase, but to what extent, in what you're advocating for here, is there potential sort of familiarity bias and a risk that goes with that? I mean, you mentioned we all know the tools that we're playing with, experimenting with, actually using in work. There's a level of familiarity that we think we know what this field really is, but what's the risk that we're misled by that familiarity and we're really missing something super important? And what's the cure for that, if that is a problem?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure, Peter, you and I have talked about this actually, and I'm sure a number of people, if not everybody on this session today, have experienced this as well. When you watch, whether it's Gemini or OpenAI, whatever, not important, but when you read the reasoning steps that the models are taking, I'm kind of always kind of really struck by, my goodness, I should apply that type of critical thinking in the way that I approach my other business problems that are not perhaps using AI as much within those kind of systems. And the reason I say that is because it almost goes back to when we were at kind of high school and what have you, when you were given kind of extra points in your math or your chemistry work for explaining how you got to the answer. I think we almost get so, as we get more experience and kind of more expertise, and we, our careers kind of, as we spend more years kind of doing our thing, there's a danger that you just go into kind of autopilot or co-pilot, pardon the pun. You go into autopilot in terms of, not thinking about your process in terms of how you're making your decisions. Ultimately, I suppose kind of it gives the game away, this comment, because I see AI as a decision-making enhancing tool, okay, or set of tools. And so by looking at the way that these systems reason, I think it gives us a bit of a kick up the backside in terms of reminding us how structured and kind of how deliberate and how critical thinking we need to be. People talk about using kind of AI and LLMs to kind of make shortcuts in our work. I think we already do that cognitively, okay? And so really addressing that point, there's a lot we can learn from the way that these technologies work. It reminds me of the T.S. Eliot thing from Four Quartets, Little Gidding, I think it is. At the end of all our exploration, we return to where we started and understand it for the first time. Terribly paraphrased. But I think our interactions with these technologies with the artificial kind of machine intelligence has a lot to inform us around our human biological intelligence, which kind of ties us, perhaps, hopefully, Peter, neatly back into this idea of organizational natural selection, of the idea of not just adopting AI, but being willing to look at the ways in which we can adapt ourselves, but the adaptation of our organizations, so that we create an organization that's almost at the right pH level to osmotically kind of align, or better align with the capabilities of the technology. If we can create that osmotic kind of flow where the technology isn't impeded, or there isn't that much kind of resistance or less resistance, then I think it bodes well for the way in which all of your organizations can actually work with AI in 2026.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. And thank you everyone for joining in. I can't help but resist saying that to get to a point where we had within a couple of sentences, a discussion of poetry and osmosis. I don't think I could have more ably sort of juxtaposed the human and technical kind of challenges that live together in this whole field. So thank you so much for your time, Paul. This has been, as always, fascinating. Thank you everyone that has been contributing in the LinkedIn thread as well. We invite you, of course, to continue that conversation going on the LinkedIn thread as well, but also with us here at MIT and at MIT Sloan Executive Education. Paul, if you haven't had the opportunity to meet him in person or online in any of his teaching with us at the Sloan School, we're sharing a link now to our artificial intelligence courses, which many of which Paul teaches in and leads, and there are many others there as well. We'd love to keep this conversation going. Thank you, Paul, for your time. I know there's a lot going on at the moment, so we really appreciate you spending this time with us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and hopefully we will see people in future online events and maybe even at the MIT campus as well.
Thank you.